If you're looking for hope for the Browns 2025 season, Joel Bitonio has some to sell you. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer Sherman, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Joel Bitonio sees a lot of potential in the 2025 season, particularly for the offense. PFF got this ranking wrong, and 3 players who will be pivotal to the success of the Browns defense in 2025, continuing on from our series this week where I did 3 players on the offensive side. Now we go to the defensive side. I do want to thank you for being on every day with the Locked On Browns podcast. Make it your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, and of course, at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And Joel Bitonio spoke on Monday at the Cleveland Browns Foundation annual golf tournament, and had some enlightening things to say about a number of topics, including his reasons for returning to play football and opting not to retire this year, which I do want to get into here a little bit coming up, because he had some interesting quotes just about the Browns' new offensive line coach and Mike Bloomgren. And I think it gives some insight into how that room was run last year and how it's going to be run differently this year, and how it sounds like from Bitonio's standpoint works in their favor more with a coach like that. So we'll talk about all those things, but the big one I wanted to hit on was just this idea that, as I've talked about, like this, the over under for the Browns win total this year being around like 5.5, right? And how I think that it won't be, even though they have a schedule that's considered tougher, I don't think it'll be hard to overcome or surpass that total. I feel like this Browns team still has talent on it, and I do feel like as long as they get competent quarterback play and an offense that can find ways to have sustaining drives, they will be better than they were a year ago. And so, yeah, you could accidentally win a couple more games here or there to get you to like 6 on the season, which is why I had them at 6-11 for my overall projection. But Joel Bitonio, the way he talks about this offense and the scheme and what it looks like, I think is going to give Browns fans a lot of hope. And if you're somebody who's trying to drink that Kool-Aid and get yourself excited about this season that so many think is just going to be a useless, worthless one, I think these types of comments are going to get you excited. This was what Joel Bitonio had to say about the offense and the install and how they're going back to, as I've talked about, the basics with Kevin Stefanski's system, and why he thinks it's a good thing for the Browns.
Yeah, for me, it feels like a 2020-2021 install of the outside zone with power schemes mixed in, which I think is a strength of, what our line do. Obviously, we're a little bit older, but like Jack comes from that outside zone. Wyatt is one of the better pullers, power blockers in the league. Poe can kind of do it all, but I think it fits us so much better. And then for an O-line, you drop back 40, 50, 60 times a game, and that's still going to happen. You still have to pass the ball to win in this league. But if you can have a brand of we're going to take care of the football, and I think the way we won in the past is our defense was fresh. Like the games that they play great, they play 50 or 60 snaps, not the 70 or 80 snaps a game. And so if we can control the ball and handle those things, I think it's a big step. But from the installs and from what I've seen, it's going back to what Coach Stefanski has been known for.
Listen, I'm not going to try to sell you on the Browns being a playoff team. I'm certainly not going to go there with any of my predictions leading up to the season. But you hear those comments. You hear somebody who's in that building, who's on the offensive line, who's important to what that group and that unit wants to do, talk about this offense and talk about how they're going back to what it was in 2020, 2021. 2020, this was a playoff team. Now, again, like different situation, younger players that were at your core. You had a different quarterback, obviously. So I'm not going that far with it. But if there's any reason that you're looking for, anything you're trying to grasp onto to get excited about this year and feel like there's a chance that this team could sort of surprise some people, I think the comments from Joel Bitonio are are it. I think that is the selling point you take with this Browns team about why they're going to be better than they were a year ago, why people maybe are underselling what their win total is going to be and how effective or how good they're going to be as a team next year. The idea, as Joel alluded to, that they get back to the basics of being a run-heavy team. They can do that outside zone stuff. They have guys built for that, but they can also work in some of the power stuff that makes somebody like Wyatt Teller so successful as a puller. And then off of that, you sort of build the passing game around that. And if you have somebody like Flacco out there who's great in play action, I think that sort of takes care of itself and it thrives. I don't know that Flacco is going to be like this incredible quarterback for 17 games, but even if he gives you like a spurt at the beginning of the season, you feel pretty good about things, and maybe things go awry, but you pivot to a rookie, and you feel like there's already sort of a foundation established there of like what you're trying to do and what your identity is. It's getting back to that identity. It's finding that identity, and all the things Joel talked about in that clip and throughout the press conference in general, I think pointed to this Browns team finding that identity again. And that's huge, because at the end of last season, Joel was one of the players, him and Jack Conklin most notably, his offensive line mate, who commented on just this idea that, you can't build the offense just around one guy, and that they got away from what made them successful. They are going back to that. They are going back to the concepts and the things that made them successful as an offensive line, that made this team very successful, especially early on in Kevin Stefanski's tenure. Like, there's a lot to like with those comments from Joel Bitonio. And like I said, if there's anything that you're looking for in terms of hope, like a reason to feel like this season could go differently than what everyone's projecting it will go, I think that's it. It's this idea that the offense is going to be better than it was a year ago, and that if you just get competent, a competent offense, competent quarterback play, that you have a chance to win certainly more games than you did last year when you only won 3, and who knows, maybe you even exceed people's expectations. I don't think that's going to happen just because the schedule's tough, but I thought that those comments are pretty poignant, and that has been my argument for why I think at least 6 wins is attainable, because I think the offense is going to be more is going to be more reliable than it has been in previous years. And everything he laid out was perfect, right? Like, you have a good ground game, you take care of the football, it's more of a possession offense, and you're not having to throw it 70, 80 times. And you're also not trying to, obviously that was an exaggeration. And then on top of that, like, your defense isn't on the field for 70, 80 plays. Like, your defense is fresher because you're having longer drives. You're milking the ball up and down the field and the clock, and giving your offense is actually scoring and taking some pressure off that unit. It could come together to equal a better season than people are thinking. Again, my projection is 6-11, but I thought those comments from Joel are the argument to be made as to why the Browns are maybe being undersold, because there is still some talent on this team, which we'll talk about here in a moment. I also just wanted to point to, Joel talked about some of his reasons for coming back, and the biggest one being that after he talked to his family, he just felt like he can still play this game and still play at a high level, and so he wanted to keep playing football. But he did mention the fact that Mike Bloomgren is coming in as the new offensive line coach, and how his exact words were, he used some vulgarities that I don't want to use on here, but he basically said, like, to be an offensive line coach, you got to be a jerk. And that, like, in that room, not like, as a person, like, he gets along with Mike Bloomgren. They've had meetings together over dinner and all these different things. They talked about their family lives and things, but he just means, like, as a coach, you got to kind of be a jerk. You can go find the actual wording somewhere else via the press conference. But I thought that was interesting, because I do think it spoke to last year with Andy Dickerson. There was some excitement about a different perspective and a different sort of approach being brought into that room after the Callahan years. But it seems like Bitonio, at least, and I think he made it sound like the room as a whole, they relate better, or they just perform better when somebody comes in and is more demanding of them. And it sounds like that's what Mike Bloomberg is bringing to the table. So again, along the lines of, like, going back to the basics, going back to what made them successful, an offensive line coach who's of that ilk, who's going to bring that heat and that pressure every day. On top of, hey, we're going back and doing the things that made us successful. We found our identity again with this offense and with Kevin Stefanski's system. I think you do have a perfect storm for this team to certainly give you a much better offense than you saw last year. Whether it leads to playoffs or not, only they can sort of go out and prove that on the field. I'm not predicting it, but I think like they're being undersold in a way because people are maybe underestimating what this offense is going to be able to do. Just being able, if by just going back to what made Kevin Stefanski successful early on in his tenure here in Cleveland. Speaking of getting things wrong or being undersold, I know we love rankings this time of year, but I found one that PFF, in my opinion, got pretty wrong. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means that when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free and share it with your network to get qualified candidates all in one place. I can't speak to the small business owner side of LinkedIn. I can speak to the hiring side, but what I can tell you is through my experience with LinkedIn, it has led to many job opportunities just because I showed up in searches for people that were looking for certain qualifications and made connections and then ended up having interviews because of it. Post Your Job is LinkedIn's new feature. It can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. Also, add that hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helped them find quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions may apply. All right, so as I said, Joel Bitonio is trying to sell some hope here that the season may not be as bad as it's being projected because of them going back to what they do best. And what I thought was interesting, we love rankings this time of year. It is almost prime quarterback tier, quarterback ranking season. We're almost there in the NFL counter because that's what happens this time of year. You get to July and you're leading up to the season, you're counting it down. We're ready to rank these quarterbacks. We're ready to rank these teams, whatever else. PFF did a ranking, though, this week that I thought was kind of interesting, where they basically ranked the starting lineups for all 32 teams. As you could guess, your standard teams found themselves at the top. You had the Eagles number 1, the Ravens were number 2, the Lions were 3, Chiefs were 4, Bills were 5. Those were some of the top ones that were sort of listed here based off of PFF's grading system and how they project this stuff out. Now for the Browns, they had them coming in at 32nd overall. And listen, I want to be clear here because I understand, like, after a 3-14 season, the Browns aren't really getting the benefit of the doubt from anybody. And so that's just going to be par for the course. They're going to end up dead last in a lot of these rankings. I know there was the ESPN metrics that I talked about last week that have the Browns likely to, like, they have the best odds to finish with the number 1 overall pick. Like, everyone is going to count this team out. The analytics are going to count this team out and say that they stink. And it's just going to be what it is. So you got to kind of roll with the punches here on some level. It doesn't help that their schedule is projected to be one of the toughest in the NFL as well, which just adds to the idea that, like, this is not going to be a good season for Cleveland. So that could be the case for sure. But what I think is wrong with this ranking specifically, like, if you were going to tell me you think the Browns are going to be the number 1 pick next year, I would understand that. But what I think was interesting was with this ranking specifically, you're talking about, like, the starting lineups for all these teams, like top to bottom, who's got the best players, who's got, room for improvement. Just kind of like throwing the rosters out there and saying, like, all right, how does this all stack up? And obviously PFF, they grade these guys. So they're going off the grades that they have for, all these different players. And I get there's some holes with the Browns without question. But I found it fascinating that, like, some of the teams ahead of them were ahead of them just based off their rosters. And so PFF has Joe Flacco projected as the starting quarterback. He's given like a 71.6 grade. Quinshon Judkins is your top running back. He has an 88.8 from college. Jerry Jeudy only has a 73.5, which I found fascinating. And the rest of the Browns receiver room isn't much to sneeze at. Cedric Tillman gets like a 63.6. Jamari Thrash has a 43. But, like, you got David Njoku coming off a bad year, but still Pro Bowler. DeJuan Jones, not projected to be a great left tackle, but the rest of that offensive line all have like grades in the 60s based off of PFF, and they're sort of a nice foundational group there. But then you go to the defensive side, and even just like the presence of Myles Garrett alone and somebody like Denzel Ward, who are two of the best defensive players at their respective positions in the game, you would think like that sort of tips the scales in the Browns' favor over some of these other rosters that are ranked ahead of them. And I understand like there's some unproven guys. Carson Schlesinger is someone who's going to get a lot of opportunities in this defense. Mason Graham looking to make an impact year one as the number 5 overall pick, and I think he will. And he actually has a 91.3 grade coming out of college, which should be, reason for optimism that this group's going to be good. But like I look up and down the board at these rosters, and I'm like, how like for example, the Saints. I get that Joe Flacco's at this point in his career, nothing, he's not some incredible quarterback that you're going to be like feeling really good about, or like your team's going to go to the Super Bowl with him. But they have Tyler Shuck with an 87.4 coming out of college, obviously, which sort of tips the scales in the Saints' favor as the 30th ranked overall team. There's just I get it. They got some rookies of their own. Like Chris Olave is a great receiver. Kelvin Banks is projected to be their starting left tackle. They have Alvin Kamara, who you feel really good about at the running back spot. But like on defense, like Chase Young's fine. Cam Jordan at this stage of his career isn't the same player he was during his prime. And they have some other good players, but like their defense has nobody really notable other than like DeMario Davis and Chase Young that I'm like, oh, okay. And neither of those guys I would say like the best at their respective positions. The Browns have 2 guys that tip those scales in their favor on defense. On top of the fact that like Jerry Jeudy proved he's the number 1 wide receiver last year. You still have, I think, a solid offensive line that you got to remember. You're going back to the stuff that you did well with that group in previous seasons. And I think the Browns running back room has a chance to be really good with Quinshon Judkins, Dylan Sampson, who wasn't really factored in here. I get the receiver discrepancy, probably weighed into this, but like, I don't know, like if I'm comparing the Browns roster to the Saints roster, I think the Browns roster is better. I do. And that's just based off of like they like, again, I know Pro Bowl nominations and recognition isn't the end all be all. It shouldn't be. There's guys that slip into the Pro Bowl because other guys bow out all the time, and they get to call themselves Pro Bowlers. Like Tyler Huntley is a Pro Bowler technically. Like, okay, so it's kind of an arbitrary thing. But at the same time, like you have Pro Bowler in Jerry Jeudy, you have Pro Bowler in DeJuan Jones, you have Joel Bitonio, who's picked up plenty of accolades throughout his career. You have, Wyatt Teller's been a Pro Bowler. On the defensive side, you have Myles Garrett, who's an All-Pro. You have Denzel Ward, who's, again, been up for many of these different awards, Pro Bowl recognition, etc. Like, the Titans are ranked ahead of the Browns. I see some reasons for that. They feel pretty good about Cam Ward in this offense, being the starter there, probably a better quarterback situation. Calvin Ridley's there. Tyler Lockett's there. They got better receivers. Tiandre Sweat is there on the defense. Jeffrey Simmons is there on the defense. Like they have some players that you feel pretty good about it for the Titans. So that one I see a little bit more, but the Saints roster seems worse to me. Even the Panthers roster doesn't give me much, I don't feel like warm and fuzzies about their roster in comparison to the Browns. And I get you're splitting hairs on some level over teams that are at the bottom of the standing. So who really cares? But if it was just like an arbitrary ranking of like, here's how I think the teams are going to finish, here's how I rank all 32 teams in the NFL, I would get where it's like, okay, yeah, sure, the Browns coming in dead last makes sense. But for it to be a ranking that is literally going roster by roster and deciding this team's got a really bad roster, this team's got a good roster, and you're sort of comparing it that way, I think the Browns roster overall is better than people are probably giving it credit for. And I think they're leaning too much into how things transpired last year with an offense that was inept. And I also think, too, it's kind of ironic that a year ago this time, people were talking about the Browns roster as like a sneaky Super Bowl dark horse. And now a year later, it's just no good, and they're 32nd, according to PFF. So I think this ranking's wrong. That's just me. I get it. Again, we're arguing about a team that's probably not going to be very good regardless. And the fact that they came in dead last in terms of their projected lineup, shouldn't really be that big of a deal. If you're going to move them up, it's not going to be it's not like they got snubbed where they should be like, 20th overall. I get where they're probably still a bottom 5 roster in the sport anyway. But I just think this was an egregious miss by PFF in terms of where the Browns should come in on this. Egregious is the wrong word, because egregious would be like they're like way off kilter here. Again, they're probably still a bottom 5 roster in football, but I think that some of the teams that are slightly ahead of them in this ranking, I don't know that I think those teams are actually better roster construction wise and lineup wise than what the Browns bring to the table. So I don't know. How do you feel about it? Do you think the Browns should have been 32nd in terms of their projected lineup and PFF's ranking? You can let me know at Spencito_. Jump in the comment section. But yesterday, I gave you 3 players on the offensive side that are going to be pivotal to the Browns' success in 2025. I got 3 players on the defensive side in the same conversation. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. All right, so yesterday we did 3 players on the offensive side that are going to be pivotal to the Browns having success in 2025. I'm going to the opposite side now, defensive side of the football, and we're going to do the exact same game. Now, I think in the same way I kept the quarterback conversation out of it on the offensive side, and a lot of that revolved around the idea that, like, we don't know who the quarterback's even going to be yet, because obviously, if it ends up being Shedeur Sanders, yeah, like he's going to end up being super pivotal to their success. And the quarterback position is always going to be pivotal to the team's success anyway. But in that same vein, I think I'm going to leave Myles Garrett out of this conversation for this one. Like, we're just going to bypass him because he's so obvious. Like, yes, we know Myles Garrett is going to be massively important to the success that this Browns team has in 2025. He single-handedly has won this franchise football games before. Like, we know how important he is. Now, that said, this ranking is basically going to be like the next 3 most important or pivotal players to the Browns being successful and maybe surprising some people in 2025. And I think that list, obviously, after you take Myles Garrett out of the equation, starts with Denzel Ward. Denzel Ward continues to be a stout corner in this league, one of the best in the league. And I think he doesn't get the attention that some of his peers do at this position, because he's not like the boisterous, brash, smack talk guy who's like out there making headlines and like, being like Jalen Ramsey and being more vocal. He just kind of like comes to work, he talks, but he doesn't, vocalize a lot of things. He just kind of does his work, and he quietly is one of the best corners in the game. And so I think Ward has to absolutely be on here. He can take away half the field for you. Last season was arguably his best season. Like, he was remarkable last year, making plays for this defense and making plays in the secondary. And he was able to stay relatively healthy throughout the year too, which was huge. So I think any list, if you're skipping past Myles Garrett, I understand how important he is. Ward's at the top of this thing in terms of what's gonna, 3 impact players that are gonna, on the defensive side, they're gonna make this, they're gonna be pivotal to the Browns having success this year. He's next in line. Then I'm going to a rookie next, because Mason Graham, I think, has a lot to offer this defense and is going to be looked upon to make an immediate impact on this team. There's a lot to be said about the idea that instead of investing in like the defensive end spot opposite of Myles Garrett, which the Browns have done sort of through free agency in recent years, to invest in the defensive interior and instead get yourself a guy in Graham who can take some attention away from Myles Garrett. And here's the thing. When you have somebody like Mason Graham playing inside, it makes it harder for the opposing offenses to double team Myles, because they're going to have a guy inside that they have to maybe focus on double teaming as well. And so it makes that more of a difficult task for opponents. It's another sort of layer to how they're going to attack him. Now, you can still like throw in a tight end and chip him and do different things like that, but it means you can't necessarily pull like a guard out to help double team Myles on any given play, because you have somebody else to worry about now. So Mason's presence alone is meant to be something the Browns, reap the benefits of, and meant to help Myles in a lot of ways. So they have high expectations for him. They wouldn't have taken a number 5 overall if they didn't. I think he's going to be a beast. I can't wait to see him get pads on in the practice sessions moving forward, and particularly a training camp where we get to see him like really go and get after it, because we're already seeing him like be the first into the neutral zone and make plays and disrupt things without pads. I can't wait till he can finally like be the physically imposing player that he was in college, here at the NFL with the Browns, and we get to see that firsthand. So Mason's, I think, second. And then the third one for me, I toiled over this because I do think somebody like MJ Emerson really needs a bounce back season, but I don't know that I wanted to put 2 corners on the list, because I think when you have Denzel Ward, you sort of account for the fact that like having at least one good corner, one stout top corner in this league is going to pay dividends for you on the field. So I went to the linebacker group next. And I thought about some other guys like Malik Collins up front too, him being important to this revamped defensive line. But I think I'm going to go with the linebacker group next, because JOK was a Pro Bowl player who was on the rise, continuing to get better. We know, the immense talent that he brought to the table before this neck injury that has now officially ruled him out for the 2025 season, as we know. Carson Schlesinger is going to be asked here as a rookie to essentially fill that void year one. That's a tall task. And we'll find out pretty quickly if he's up for it. But being that rangy linebacker that can cover tight ends, cover some of these other speed wide receivers out of that spot, and also be able to be instinctual enough to like fly up and make plays in the run game is something so unique and special about JOK and what he brings to the table in that middle level of the defense. And he was so important to this group. And he was a Pro Bowler 2 years ago because of how impressive he was. And Schlesinger has to sort of fill those shoes here. I think if this defense and this team specifically are going to be successful this year, they need him to, be productive out of that spot. I'm not saying he has to be JOK, but he's got to sort of give you some of that production and ability in that spot to feel good about like this defense and what they're able to do at that level this season, and have somebody who can make those plays for you. So I do think the 2 rookies both end up on the list in this instance. And those are your 3 players outside of Myles Garrett, of course, who I think are going to be pivotal to the Browns having success on the defensive side of the ball and having a successful season. If they're going to exceed expectations, those 3 guys are going to have to be players that make plays for them. Another episode down with you, Dog Pound. Thank you for joining me as always to talk about your favorite football team. We got plenty more to come this week, including on Wednesday. I'll be back out at OTAs for the next open session of the offseason program, and we'll see what it has to offer in terms of the quarterback competition. So I'll have a lot to break down for you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to make Locked On Browns your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting, or you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See you.